We're speaking with Lore Opennheim, a German refugee. And we might begin by talking a little bit about your time in Germany as a child, the very beginning. And
Okay.
tell me a little bit about...
All right. Well, I'll go. My childhood in Germany was very normal until the age of 10, 11. I lived in a, what do you call, upper middle class home. And I was an only child, unfortunately. And I did all the things every other child does here and there. It was just a normal childhood experience. However, then at age 10, Hitler came to power, and that changed things a bit. People were more afraid, and Holocaust started. By the time I was 11, and let me first go back to the German school system. You have elementary grades are from 1 to 4, and then the population is divided up. Those that can afford to send their children, the girls to lyceums, the boys to what's called gymnasium. These are what we have today as high schools. They're sort of private high schools, or they're public high schools actually, but you pay a fee, fairly healthy fee. Then there's a third group of people, and they can have a free education, also starting at 5th grade. But that education is mostly limited to the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Their math consists of arithmetic, no algebra, no geometry, not any of that. No foreign languages, or at best one. That is the public school education after the 4th grade, starting age 5 to 10th or 12th grade, whenever, probably at the 10th grade, I would say they'd graduate. And it was a very simplified education. It was easier, and it cost less. It cost the government less because they had less subjects, larger classes, not as nice buildings, no chemistry labs, and so on. So I was supposed to go to the lyceum, and I started to go. Then I guess I was close to 11, must have been between 33 and 34, and I went there for a few weeks, and it was very nice. I had my friends from grade school, from the first 4 grades, and I went with them, naturally. And then all of a sudden, after 3-4 weeks of that, a new law came out, and many laws came out in Germany very quickly, that the Jewish children whose father possibly were inducted into the army during World War I, but who did not have frontline duties, did not fight on the front, only 1% of those children could go into a lyceum class. There were 2%. It was myself and another child. And they drew lots or whatever, and they decided the other child could stay and I could not, so I had to drop out.
And what was the reason they gave for that at the time?
I don't know. They tried to give the Jewish children as little education as they possibly could, and it was just an arbitrary German Nazi law.
But nobody questioned it?
No, of course not. How can you question? You don't question laws in Germany. So my parents were in a quandary in what to do with me. To send me away, we lived in Wiesbaden, Germany, a town that is, of course, at this point widely known for the army hospital there. But it was a nice town. And we had several choices, possibly only 2 actually, 3. One, to go to a Jewish school. At that point there was a Jewish school. However, that school was a Volksschule, one of those elementary schools that only taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. No foreign languages, no math, and so on, like number 3, as I stated before. So that was a very, very simplified education, which really was not suitable for anyone that might want to pursue higher education or even leave Germany. It was just low, for lower grade, too low functioning. Then the other option was for me to go away to Frankfurt or somewhere and board there somewhere and go to school there. There were 2 very excellent Jewish schools there, Jewish high schools I could have gone to, but that was over an hour away from our hometown by train. And it was felt that a 10-year-old you don't want to send away from home that early. The third option was a pensionnat, which is a boarding school, which we had a Jewish boarding school in our town. It was run by a couple of teachers, and they took Jewish children, took students all ages, usually from 10 to the upper grades, and most of them were in the upper grades, and gave them a very academic education, and sort of made them little ladies, well-rounded ladies, all the nice things that you're supposed to know. So, they also took day students. So my parents said, well, let's send her to Pensionnat Sonnenheim, I think it was called. Let's send Lori there. And I went there, and there were 2 nice teachers there, 3 actually. One was only part-time. It was run by 2 ladies that lived there, a French lady who did some of the French classes, and a Miss Goldstein who taught all the English. And then there was a Mr. Haupt who lived in the town, who was not Jewish, but who taught geography, foreign languages, math, whatever else hadn't been taught by the other 2. And there also was supposed to be a little housekeeping taught there, and that sort of thing. It was fine and good. It was very nice, except there was only 1 other child there. So this was a school of 2 children and 2.5 teachers. So that went on for a couple of years. I had a fairly nice education there. It was a good experience. The other child left, and here these 2 lady teachers were stuck with this gorgeous building. And of course, I didn't know anything about mortgages or anything at that time, or taxes and whatever expenses were entailed. The cook left, and they were still teaching me. And then the man, Mr. Haupt, was teaching me in his apartment because it was closer, and this way he didn't have to travel so far, so it was easier for him, which was fine with me. So, but after a while, one morning we got a phone call that the last remaining teacher in this pensionnat had committed suicide. So that was the end of that. Because how could she run a school with 1 student? No matter how much they would charge, it wasn't possible. So that was a slight shock, of course. And I don't know whether it was 11 or 12 or 13, somewhere in that area, probably 12. So the gentleman teacher, Mr. Haupt, said, well, he'll give me the rest of the education. Everything was private tutoring from his home. And that's what we did. I went there every morning around 8:15, and I think he was a bit lazy, and I was supposed to do some assignments when I came because that gave him a chance to get up and have breakfast and so on. I think he got the better part of the deal. And I had my classes until 11, 12 o'clock, and then I went home, and I don't remember what I did in the afternoon. I think I had Hebrew classes in the afternoon. We had that. Hebrew classes was required by the government, or religious education was a requirement, was part of the curriculum. And
what was the setting for your religious education?
Pardon me?
What was the setting for your religious education?
All the Jewish children were religious education at first was in the schools at which we attended. Like in my grade school, one of the rabbis came in every day, or Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 to 11, and gave the religious education, as did the Catholic priest educate at the same time the Catholic children, the Protestant minister, the Protestant children. Eventually, that was discontinued, and they moved all the Jewish children 1 or 2 afternoons a week into a public school. We had our classes there. So there were about 10, 12 children, and we had that was a very good Jewish education we had. Maybe not as good as now, but we had a good Hebrew education.
Did you have a sense at that age of 10 and 11 of, as you said, that the Jewish children were separate from the Protestants from the Catholics? Did you have a sense that it was any different to be Jewish than the Protestants had a sense of being different from the Catholics?
Well, of course, because, they were separated on purpose, so that each one, there was no Sunday school. No Sunday school. All the religion was taught as part of the curriculum. And the respective ministers attended. And when the classes were over, everybody got together again for math or whatever was the next class. So there really wasn't, it wasn't a big deal at all, because that's the way it was being done. Then later on we were all together in one school, and then the Jewish children had sort of a free period. But I don't think that made too much of an impression on me. That really didn't hit home that much. It was just the fact that I was very bored. It was a lonesome thing to have private tutoring from age 10 or 11 until you're 15, 16 years old, 14, 15, whatever it was. So, you know, I didn't have enough contact with other children. That was difficult. I belonged to Jewish organizations, and I had contact with them, and it was a very limited situation. My education was great in some aspects and poor in others. I had excellent instruction in foreign languages. I had good geography classes. I had fair math classes that were nothing to write home about. I had, what did I have? I had chemistry, but I didn't have physics, and so on and so forth. So then at one point in my education, that was pretty late, I must have been 15, 16 by then, the Jewish school in Frankfurt, there's a Philanthropine, which was a very large, beautiful, old Jewish school. They had a curriculum that was based on the Cambridge College curriculum in England. And they had their curriculum, and I don't know, remember if they had teachers from them or just the curriculum. But all of a sudden I went there. My parents said that was a year and a half, and then you get your English matriculation. You were supposed to do that. That was 1937, or early 38 that I started there. I think school year started in April, and we started April 1st, 38, and was supposed to run for a few years. And ended up, because if I had stayed with the tutor, I would just continue with lessons. There was no college degree, no high school degree. There was no Abitur, which is what one strives for. No, nothing at the end. You just stopped. So I went there. It was difficult. It was 2/3 of the classes were taught in English all of a sudden instead of in German.
How did you adjust?
You worked very hard. You worked very hard. It was difficult, but it was manageable. And of course, it was good if, for instance, all of their students, they were all from the Philanthropine mostly, they had, what's the other thing? Chemistry. Well, they didn't have chemistry, so they started with chemistry. I had chemistry, but they had physics, and I didn't have physics. So for them, having some knowledge of physics, starting with physics and English wasn't bad. For me, it was terrible. I didn't know anything about physics. So I had to pick up physics in a foreign language. And it wasn't very easy. And you worked hard. I mean, I was a good student, average to good student. It was more for excellent students, basically. So those of us that were average to good worked hard at it, but it was manageable.
Where did the motivation come from in that setting? In other words, you mentioned how difficult it was. There had to be something internal, because...
Well, you wanted an education. You knew you had to leave Germany, and I wanted something to conclude my education. This would have given me the finishing touches so that I could start college, or could start vocationally or career-wise or something. But you had to do something. And my parents said that's a good school, and I enjoyed being there. For once again, I was in a classroom with 20 other kids. I lived with a very nice family that had young people. I just enjoyed it. I basically enjoyed it. So I certainly wasn't going to go back to the tutoring with a teacher that I was sick and tired of. I mean, can you visualize yourself with one teacher through years and years and years and years? It gets on your nerves. So
I think at that point we might break and come back.
Okay.
I'll tell you what, did you miss being away from your parents?
Not that much. I mean, it was 5 days a week, you know. I mean, I was a teenager, and I was glad for the independence I had.
What were some of the other, did you have a lot of friends now that you were in a school with a lot of other kids?
A couple of them. It's how I was not used to having that many close friends. And yeah, I had a few friends, 2 or 3 friends, and I was friendly with very close with some of the people that I lived with. They had a young lady who was the organist in our town, and I liked her very much. And she took me, she belonged to music groups, and she would take me along with her to her music groups, and that was very interesting. I met very nice, interesting people there. So it really was a very good experience. Wasn't sure, but it was awfully hard. I'm not sure whether I could have, you know, whether I would have done well for the 2 years. I'm not sure. I hung in there and I did fairly well. But it was complicated.
Gosh.
It was very complicated.
Let's end right there about that.
Start again.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, we might start exactly where you left off. And what's so interesting is the fact that you had this drive to succeed and excel. At what point going through this, you mentioned starting off basically at the age of 10 or 11 with your education. We back up. I'm totally.
Well, that's fine. Just go ahead.
All right.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Okay. Talking about the fact that at this point in your life, so I guess had developed by this time an awareness of the education that had been lacking. Was this sort of a gradual process?
Well, I suppose I grew up feeling that education was a very, very important thing. That I had to have an education in order to succeed in life, in order to live an independent, a halfway decent living, you know, to make a decent living and live a good life. You had to have an education. That's, I guess, the way I felt. And the accepted thing was to get through school of some sort or other. So, you know.
So if we have you now grappling with a foreign language and taking science courses.
Science courses in a foreign language. And somebody tried that. It is not easy. Also English and, you know, French in a foreign language. I mean, almost everything, 80% was done in a foreign language. I think chemistry was not. A couple of courses were not. But, you know, one worked hard, one hung in there. And in Germany, in schools, you work hard. I mean, you know, before that, I didn't have to work so hard.
So we'd have you taking these difficult courses in your teenage years.
Yeah, right. Okay, but then November 10th, 1938 came. And the Holocaust really started full strength there. And I picked up that morning and went home. You know, we knew a lot of people were in concentration camps. One was afraid of being in the subway, on the bus, on the train, everywhere. But I made my way home. Meanwhile, my parents were taking English lessons. And one of the ladies from that school, that pensionnat that I went to originally, used to go there every Thursday. Was a Thursday. Go there every Thursday. That's Kristallnacht. You know, the day before Kristallnacht, or the day after. I don't remember which. Was the day after, I think. The businesses were all destroyed and all that sort of thing. And on the way to our house, I met this French teacher. And the first thing I said to her, "Is my father all right?" So she said, "He is not home, but he has not been imprisoned." My father and my uncle, both, my uncle lived with us at that time, was 2 men. So by the time I got home, Mother told me that my father had left the house and was going to be with friends somewhere, where they didn't exactly know. Well, he had to go, but some friends that he didn't expect that somebody would go there and try and capture him. Because people, you know, Nazis, they would come into the house and arrest all the men, put them into concentration camp. So my uncle went to the hospital quick and got a hernia operation that day. He figured he was safe there and he needed a hernia operation anyhow. Or prostate, I think it was. Okay, he had an operation. And my father left to be with friends, and he stayed away a few days, and then he came back, but he was all right. He was not taken into concentration camp. But that was the conclusion of that education for me.
Well, now, how did you know? You said that you knew this was happening. Was it word of mouth? Obviously, the
Yes,
press was
of
controlled.
course. Of course, everybody knew right away what was happening. They knew the business was destroyed. The typewriters were thrown out of the windows. My parents had a wholesale food business, and that was all destroyed. They couldn't go back there. The synagogue was burnt down. You knew that. You knew everything was happening. All the people, there were telephones. People were arrested.
It would just seem like that it would be so unbelievable that you would question whether, you know, are you sure you got the story right and all this?
Well,
when you
that's why I
heard
went
things.
home right away. And then I didn't go back to school. That was the end of that school. So then I stayed home for a while. Now, what am I going to do? Then at that point, it became very, very imperative that we did everything we possibly could to get out of Germany. We had tried to get an American visa before, but we were denied because I had a rash on my leg. It was a neurodermatitis. And the doctor also said my father had a heart condition. Well, my father never in his life had a heart condition, and he lived to the age of 101. I don't think the doctor who lived hard and fast, the American doctor in Germany who lived hard and fast, could possibly have lived to 101. But the visa was denied us, and that was not very fair because we were basically healthy, of course. But there was a lot of graft going on as to visas, American visas. People had numbers, quota numbers. And when our quota number came up, 1830 something, whatever it was, we were denied the visa. But we know that a lot of graft had been going on with money and sex and everything else. I think it was more sex than money. And so what are we going to do now? Oh, there are all kinds of interesting stories coming to my mind. Okay. Well, we decided, well, after a few weeks at home, I was getting bored again. I said, look, I need I need to learn something. I can't go to a foreign country. By that time, I was 15, 16. I can go somewhere and not be able to, you know, to support myself or help support my parents. You have to work. I don't know nothing. I don't know anything to make a living at. So I always was interested in health. I was always interested in children. So then an opportunity opened up of a children's orphanage that would take teenage students and teach them how to take care of children, how to take care of a home. Basically, that's how they got their free help, and we paid tuition as well. It wasn't academically too much of an education, but it was a practical education. Now I went there, and that lasted. It was also a couple of years, of course, and lasted for about a year or so that I went. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed working with children very much. And I was with peers, with people my age, which was very nice. And I made friends, of course. As it seems that I was always searching for situations where there were peers my age. So what happened then? Wait a minute. Okay, and after a year or so, my parents finally found a way of leaving Germany. And that was an interesting story. Now, can I go into a little
Please.
separate story? My mother's brother and his wife had immigrated to the Dominican Republic. My uncle was a specialist in fertilizer production, and he got a very good job with the government making fertilizer out of bird droppings and various other chemical things. My aunt was a piano teacher, and she taught the president's child piano. That was number one. One day, my uncle was driving out into the country with a native chauffeur. And sort of in the middle of the country, middle of nowhere, he sees there was a car that had broken down, and again a native chauffeur and a Caucasian person was in that car. So my uncle said, "There's there are not many foreign people around. Let me find out if he needs any help." So he went to the car and he said, "Excuse me, I'm on my way back to Ciudad Trujillo. May I give you a ride? You need a ride." And the man said, "Oh yes, I'd be so grateful to you. I'd like to get out of this situation." The car broke down. There's no one here to fix it, and no other people that I know. So I'll be happy to accept the ride. And they got into the car. And on the way, he told my uncle, he said, incidentally, I'm the Assistant American Consul in the Dominican Republic. I think you saved my life. If I can ever do a favor to you, please let me know. So my uncle said, yes, you could do me a big favor. My sister and brother-in-law and their daughter have a visa to the Dominican Republic because they couldn't get one to the United States. However, in order to come to the Dominican Republic, they need a transit visa through the United States because the boat goes via New York and they cannot get that have trouble getting that transit visa. He said, no problem. I'll call Frankfurt and I'll arrange for them to receive the transit visa. So I might have jumped ahead.
Go back to where you're comfortable with it.
Okay,
You
I
were
think
using
this
the
was
story
the
to
second
illustrate.
time. Yes, okay. I'm sorry, this story came second. The story first came that after I left the children's home, we were trying to come to the United States or the Dominican Republic. I think it was already the Dominican Republic. And we were going through Lisbon and Italy. Italy was at that time not in the war, via United States to the Dominican Republic. We got as far as, I think, Munich. I don't remember which town we were going. It wasn't Lisbon, it was a different way. Okay, we got as far as Munich. They took all the Jewish people off the train and said we were supposed to go through Italy, not Lisbon, to Italy. That Italy has entered the war with Germany as part of the Axis. No more Jewish people may enter Italy. You have to go back to where you were. So we didn't have a choice. I had just been vaccinated because I needed that for wherever we were supposed to go. And I was running a high fever on top of it all. And so we got off the train, went into the train dining room of the station, had a cup of coffee, and tried to figure out what we're going to do next. We have to go back. I started to go to the ladies' room, and a gentleman stopped me. Of course, at that point, one is very paranoid and very, very suspicious. Gentleman stopped me, and he said, "Excuse me, I'm from the Jewish Federation." They love that. Have you been stopped, kept from entering Italy? Are you on the way out of Germany? I'm sure we looked at it. So we said yes. He said, well, we have housing for you in a hotel nearby, and then we'll make arrangements so that you get back to your hometown again. Because you didn't have tickets or anything, and you couldn't bring any money with you. So you really didn't have much. Your money was sitting in a German bank somewhere in your hometown. What you had with you was a few dollars, $4 or whatever. But I did also have the house key, which somehow or other I forgot to leave at home. So we said, okay, and he put us up in a hotel, and 2 days later we went back home. Well, back home already 2 other families were in our apartment. Because they only permitted, we had a very large apartment, they permitted only 1 or 2 rooms per family to live in. So, there were already, we were 3 families in there, and my uncle in this 3-bedroom apartment. So, what could we do? We went back and we adjusted to life and stayed in Germany somewhere until another opportunity should arise. Meanwhile, again, here I was stranded education-wise. What was I going to do next? You don't want to hang around at home. One doctor was trying to teach me to become an assistant in a doctor's office, and that was okay. I liked that. But then he left, or whatever happened. He left, and that petered out. So I decided to become a nurse. And I entered nurses training in the Jewish hospital in Berlin, which was fine, which I enjoyed and I liked and all. It went for about a year. And then, all of a sudden, they chose people. Well, the hospital knew that at that point, should I go back to that Dominican Republic thing, or does it stay on the tape? It stays on. Okay, by that time, my uncle had given a ride to this American consul, and he had made arrangements to get visas again for us through Frankfurt over the Dominican Republic. And it was just a matter of trying to find tickets on a boat, and my father was working very hard on that. So they knew, the hospital knew that I was going to leave within the next few months or few weeks to get there. So that really wasn't very nice, but they were asked, they said, you can keep your students, but we need 5 or 6 student nurses that you could spare for forced labor in a German factory. So knowing that I wasn't going to stay there very long, they picked me. So for a few days I was winding spools in a factory.
Spools of thread?
Spools of thread, yeah, it was a thread factory. So I did that, and my mother said, you come on home now, we're going to work on the immigration, you come home and stay home, we want you right there where we are. That's it. So I went home, and I stayed there, and then meanwhile this gentleman from the Dominican Republic, the American consul, had arranged for our visas, and we actually got on a train to leave Germany again. Now that was 1941. See, we started out in 38 with this trying to leave. But this was 1941 already. That was August 41. We went, and at that time it really was, we were on the last train, as it turned out, to the last boat that left with German immigrants. I mean, it was that close. We didn't know it. It was that close. And it was a train ride from Germany through France, through Spain, through Portugal, into Lisbon. And the interesting thing was that every time the train stopped somewhere for some reason, probably to change engines or something, we had to pull all the shades down in the train so that nobody could look and see all those Jews leaving Germany. I don't know. Yeah, it was all part of persecution. They found every little way of persecuting people to persecute, and they did. And so we finally made it to Lisbon, and we made it on the boat, and there the boat was a very nice boat, except that we were downstairs in dormitories. Men and women dormitories and mixed dormitories. It really didn't matter too much. So we got in the dormitories. Now we only had a transit visa for the United States. We did not have any visa to stay there. We are supposed to leave one boat and immediately go on to the next boat and leave for the Dominican Republic once we hit New York Harbor. Okay, we hit New York Harbor. What happened? The war had become, I think the United States had not entered the war yet, but it was coming close to entering the war. We arrived on Labor Day 1941 in New York. We couldn't embark because it was Labor Day, because the ship would have had, they would have had to pay a much higher fee. So we stayed on the boat an extra day. And then instead of getting onto the boat to the Dominican Republic, the political situation had changed. And we had, and they put us on Ellis Island. They didn't quite know what to do. They said, you cannot use your transit visa. You cannot leave the States. You could have looked into the harbor and looked at our boats and could be spying on us. We won't let you out. All right, that's fine with us who wanted to go to the Dominican Republic in the first place. It was just, there was no other place to go. So we stayed on Ellis Island, which was not bad. And again, I got a little bit of education because there was a nurse who was teaching me to take care of infants. I knew how to take care of them. There were several families with infants there, and they were very happy to let me babysit and increase my experience in taking care of infants. That's what I wanted to do anyhow. So after about 6 weeks, we became friendly with other families there. And after about 6 weeks, they said, okay, you can leave Ellis Island on a visitor's visa, but you don't have a permanent working permit. Or they had working permits, I don't quite remember exactly, because we were able to work. We were allowed to work somehow or other, in certain situations, but not in others. So there was one family there and said, oh, my sister and brother-in-law live there and they have 3 children, they need a baby nurse. One of them is a baby, could you please, would you be interested? And I said, sure. So then I started my career as baby nurse and then got to the United States that way then.
Let's pause right there. You're a nurse in the United States.
Name. No idea what it meant.
You said it took 3 years to get out. Was it?
Are you taping?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was it? What's it like to live in kind of 3 years of that horror and tension about trying? Was that difficult? Or
Very nerve-wracking. It was a very nerve-wracking experience. And because you're afraid of every loud footstep that you hear on the street or in the house, because you think somebody's going to come get you, yourself, your father, your mother, or somebody else. You had to pass the house where the Nazis were holding prisoners at times. It was on the road to visiting a girlfriend. So, it was a very frightening experience, very nerve-wracking. Where everybody is very, very tense. One of the things we had to do was pull down all blackout shades. And you couldn't turn a light on. If you went to a room, turn a light on the blackout shade, this could be your death. They could imprison you and kill you for that. Because, they say you're a spy. You wanted the Allied planes to come right here. And one time we really did want someone in the house, walked into a bedroom, flipped the light on. And the shade wasn't down yet, and the warden came, all these volunteer wardens that were hanging around came and said, oh, blah, 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 blah. It was a big deal, but fortunately the thing was smoothed over and nothing happened. But you never know when anything's going to happen. You never know when you get imprisoned or tortured or anything. It went on for years. It was a very nerve-wracking experience. But also one of the things I resented so very much was that I was deprived of any kind of normal teenage years. There was no normalcy to my life. There were no boyfriends around because most everyone was gone. I think I had a date 1 or 2 times. The girls that I liked from other schools that were non-Jewish, of course, they would pass you right by the street and look straight in your eye and not smile or say anything. So you lost all those friends. And your Jewish friends gradually all left. And it was a very horrible experience. I mean, I still resent, I think that's one of the things I resent the most, that, you were deprived. There is a period of growing up from age 10 to 21 that I'm missing, that I probably did no emotional growing up at all or whatever. It's I feel it's a big void in my life. And talking to other Holocaust victims, it certainly is not a big deal that I have missed. I didn't have any of the horrible experience, but I still resent it. And I was in Germany last year, 2 years ago. We had a family reunion in Switzerland. I went for 2 days to my hometown, and 2.5 days. Actually, I spent 2.5 days in Germany, and I was full of anger, really. I would cash a traveler check in the bank that my father used to deal with. I picked that bank to cash my traveler's check, and I felt like going in there, like saying, as I was dealing with them, who are you? You're not supposed to be here. This is ours. I went into our house. We had a beautiful big house. I should have brought that picture. I thought of it too late. And there's this 3 large apartments and 2 little apartments, one on top and one on bottom. I walked up there and there were 24 units in that building. 2 very large ones, and they cut up all the rest of it, like our floor. Our apartment was an entire big floor. They cut that up into any number of units. And I walk up there, and the thing looked so strange to me. On the way to I was with a cousin who grew up with me. And he had orchestrated this very carefully, and so on and so forth. And I walked up the street, which I thought always was a long street that would take me about 10-15 minutes to walk up. And here, within 5 minutes, I'm standing in front of this big house, and I said, Alfred, that looks like our house, but we haven't walked that much yet. Everything that seemed like a big distance, and today it looks like real close together. I don't know why a lot of people have said that. So he said, yes, it is. The house was beautifully restored, repainted. Nothing had happened to it. The little garden that we had, we had a gardener who very carefully had fruit trees that were only about 3 feet high, made delicious pears and other fruit and flowers. Something that was carefully nourished because it was a small garden. It was a parking lot.
Dear.
And I walk up the steps to our apartment, and there is a girl running. I look around, I find out there's nothing there but a hallway with closed doors. So finally somebody came and looked at me questioning and said, can I help you? What do you want here? And I said, oh, I used to live here. I just want to see what it looks like now. I really had wanted to look out of the windows, get the view, but I wasn't able to do that. But, she looked at me. She opened the door to her apartment. She opened it about 10 inches, slithered in, and slammed the door shut and locked it.
So I want to go into that a little more, but come back for the moment because we're trying to keep this in chronological order to the point where you're on Ellis Island and you're taking care of the little children.
Okay, right. Okay, and then I took the job as the baby nurse, right, and then went fine. And then I stayed with that family 6 months or so, and then I decided to take a better paying job because I knew good baby nurses, young ones, were in demand. So I took another job with another family, just taking care of one child. This was 3 children, including 2 teenage and 1 not very healthy baby. And then I took a job with another one with a physician, and that was fine. And as I was growing into my very late teens and maybe closer to 20, I said to myself, well, what kind of life is this? I cannot work, I can't meet anyone because I'm never free in the evenings or once or twice a week. I'm free one Sunday a month. How can I date? How can I meet? How can I live a normal life? And I met a lot of other young people, and they all had jobs in offices or stores, and I didn't like to work in offices or stores. I like to work with children, and I said to myself, well, I guess I better get an education and try again one more time. I've got to find some sort of an education where I can finish off with a diploma or a license or something. So I looked around the various hospitals and also talked to my friends who knew the field quite well, and decided to study occupational therapy, to go to college. First thing I did was wanting to go to college. Well, I didn't want to teach. What was I going to do? I was thinking of nursing, and that didn't quite work out. I don't know. I don't remember. I tried at Columbia University, and I really did not have the credentials for college. With all the schooling I had, I still didn't have any credentials. I didn't have a high school diploma. I had like 12 years of one kind of class and 8 years of another kind of class. It just was so mixed up that Columbia said, you really need to somehow finish your high school education before you can do this. I said, well, but I have 2 years of college in some of the subjects. Well, nothing worked right. So then I decided, I waited a little bit longer, decided to go into occupational therapy, because nursing really, I was afraid the hours again would not do well with having my own family. And the pediatrician of the child I took care of said, why do you want to go to college? I can get you all the jobs you want. I said, no, thank you. I want to have a family of my own one day, and you can't be loyal to 2 families. So Meanwhile, the war had started and nursing really was at a premium. I mean, I could have made all kinds of money as baby nurse, but I didn't want to stick with it. And but I enjoyed the family I was living with. I liked that very much. It was a young family, and that was fine. I also learned English there, and I learned to become American, as Americanized as possible. It was a very good entry, something I recommend for the Russian families. It was a good way of getting used to things. And I finally explored occupational therapy, and NYU, New York University was teaching it. And so I decided to go. They said, well, okay, but you can enter as special student, but you need to finish some high school credits before. You haven't got enough credits in English. You're missing about 7, 8 credits. That's a lot of credits to miss.
When were you supposed to be doing this simultaneously, or?
Well, I decided to do it simultaneously. I decided I've got to get started one way or the other. I said, okay, I'll start as special student and then finish the high school credits as I go along, because I figured if I have to take college English, which I would take, that already helped me along with the high school English. So I don't have to go back. I wasn't about to go back to high school. And you know, I was limited in funds. I had to figure out how I was going to use the funds that I had earned while I was baby nursing. And my parents, I didn't want to take any money from them. They were having a hard time on themselves. So I figured it would be easier if I did it simultaneously. I don't know whether it was or wasn't, but anyhow, I started that, and then my advisor didn't realize, knew I started as special student, but as time went on, she didn't realize I was a special student. And you start off with one curriculum, you get a sheet that tells, as a freshman, they say, in order to graduate in 1950 in occupational therapy, you have to have so many courses of psychology, so many of anatomy, so many of physiology, and all those things. And then the next year, they decide, well, it wasn't quite right. Let's do the next students 2 years later. Let's change the curriculum a little bit. And they change their curriculum very often. But once you had your green sheet with your original curriculum, you stuck with that. Well, I didn't have a green sheet with the curriculum. And my advisor was not too much aware of it. She wouldn't have put up with all that. And I was going to stay in the school, and I was going to continue one way or the other. So eventually, I went to one of those college prep schools and explained my story to them. They said, yes, we can help you get your high school credits for all those courses if you attend classes for 2 weeks, or, you know, a limited amount of class, because I had the knowledge by then. And then somebody at school said, well, we will give you the exam in French, and you can make up 3, 4 credits in French. And I had English credits that I made up in the school, and then German credits I made up somehow too. So I really made French and German credits up without going back to school by taking the entrance exams, the Regents exams, the New York Regents exams, which were difficult. And the English, I took the courses. They said, if you take the courses and you should be able to pass the exam, then we will give you credit. It wasn't a accredited school. So I worked my credits to them, and then one day I came to my advisor and I said, here, I've matriculated finally.
How long did the process take?
2, 3 years, at least 2 years. She said, you mean you're just matriculating now? Everything has been changed. You've taken all these courses meanwhile, and they don't apply. Some of them don't apply. We've changed the curriculum. So between electives and changes and back and forth and repressed anger by the advisor, we eventually got it all straightened out, and I got my 5 years of education as an occupational therapist, including my 10 months of clinical affiliation. I got all that done. See, meanwhile, I thought I could work, do some of this high school stuff, and take maximum amount of credits, which wasn't the greatest idea. But anyhow, I somehow got through, got my diploma, and became an occupational therapist, and got my job. And that was what I wanted. I wanted a vocation, a career that I could use always. I'm still an occupational therapist. I'm very glad I fought for that education. I worked very hard for the education, but it was all very, very much worthwhile. And I think what I'm trying to prove is that no matter how adverse the conditions are, if you want education badly enough, you really can get it. But so nice to have it, and I'm very proud of it.
So at that point, you were, having had the educational opportunities, however you received them,
I received them.
you were able to, at that point, you were not lacking at all in the training and background and so forth.
You couldn't graduate. You had, and it's a licensing thing. I'm licensed and registered with the American Occupational Therapy Association, licensed in the state of Tennessee, and I have all my credentials. I mean, I had those in 1950. I finally got that. All right, it took me from 1938, from 1934 to 1951 or 50 to receive. I had a normal education from 1932 to 1936, or 28 to the, no, wait a minute. From 1928 to 1932 or 33, I had a normal education. Then I had all this crazy mixed up stuff from 1933 to 1950, and then ended up again with a normal ending to my education.
Now, we're at 1950. What transpired at this point for you?
Well, I took a job as occupational therapist with the Cerebral Palsy Association, United Cerebral Palsy of Passaic, New Jersey, in an outpatient clinic, and I worked there for a year. Then, interestingly enough, I mean, occupational therapists are mostly in hospitals, and I had my affiliations in hospitals, but I decided to work in schools.
What brought you to that decision? Just because there were so many?
Well, I wanted to work with the I wanted long-term I wanted to see my patients longer than for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 3 months that they were in the hospital, and then they go home and you never see them again. You don't know how far they have gotten. I work mostly with physical disability patients. So I decided, and also the hours are better. So at first I worked in an outpatient clinic, then I took a job in Suffolk, New York with the school system. And I liked that. We started a camp and it's still in existence. And then by that time I had married and I had one child, and then I didn't work the first few years until this child was 3 years old, 3.5 years old, could go to a good Jewish day school in New York, and Beth Hayelet. And then I took a job with the school system, New York school system in Long Island, or in Brooklyn. And I worked with the Cerebral Palsy, again, School for Handicapped Children, as part of a public school. Did that till my second child came. By that, then I didn't work for a while, and we moved to Nashville from New York.
What time frame are we talking about now?
1957, 58. We moved in 58. My daughter was born in 57, November 57, and we moved in September 58, Rosh Hashanah, right after Rosh Hashanah that night. And then here I didn't work for a few years, for about 3 years, and then I decided to go back to work, and I worked at Junior League Home for Crippled Children 2 days a week, again with handicapped children.
What brought you to Nashville? You said you didn't work at the point where you just came to Nashville. What was the decision?
Well, it was a business proposition for my husband. He wanted to work here with my brother and sister-in-law, and they had a factory, and they were anxious for him to join them because they wanted someone from the family to be involved with the business. So it was a good opportunity. It was a good stepping stone for them and for us, because my husband was in the jewelry business. Jewelry business in New York wasn't very good at that time. Everybody bought wholesale. And so after, when my daughter was about 3.5 or 3, somewhere, anyhow, I took probably about 2. I was first offered just working on a grant at Bill Wilkerson had gotten a grant for occupational therapy, and I was there until that grant was used up. And then I took a 2-day-a-week job at Junior League Home for Crippled Children. And then for a while I didn't work again, was busy with my own children. And then I went with Public Health, Tennessee Department of Public Health, full-time. And I was with them for 9 years, doing home visits, working with schools, setting up programs in schools, doing home care, and working with activity coordinators in nursing homes. 2 colleagues and I started all the activity programs in all of the nursing homes in Tennessee. I had the Middle Tennessee ones. We trained the activity coordinators. We insisted that the directors hire activity coordinators, and we helped them get started in the programs. And we were their crying towel, the activity coordinators' crying towel, when things didn't go right.
Let me interrupt right here. Let's change the page.
Junior high.
Okay, Stacy, go ahead.
Okay. Talk to me a little bit about
Should we just finish?
Oh, sure.
Where I am now, and then, at the for the last 10 years, I've been working at the Tennessee School for the Blind with the multi-handicapped blind children. And I've enjoyed cerebral palsy and mental retardation and all various paraplegia, spina bifida. We had all the various physical handicaps that happen to have blindness associated with it, or the blind children that happen to be physically handicapped. And I've enjoyed that very much, and I have a very strong program there.
As a result of the experiences you've had getting your education, I guess would be paramount here, how have you provided for your children in terms of their own secular education and also their Jewish education?
Well, when my children were needing me the most, I would only work 2 days a week, and during that time I had help at home. And, I had my job arranged so that I could stay home until the children were on the bus to school. And I got back in time to pick them up from the bus and take them to Hebrew school, the 2 days, and Sunday school and so on. At that time, there weren't that many opportunities for daycare and so on. Mothers did not work as much at that time. And I saw to it that that came first. My children, family and children came first before the career. I've probably missed out a lot. I probably could be a lot further in my career if I had not done that, but that's the way I chose to do it.
But you've come a long way.
I've come a long way. I should be able to be director of programs or something, but I somehow stayed away from that because I couldn't coordinate. I didn't want a job that would keep me tied up all day, every day, and evenings and so on and so forth. I had to provide for my family first. I mean, that was part of our deal at the time.
As a refugee, we hear so much about survivors and how a number of them go through what is called survivor's guilt. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
What is there any bonding experience that you as a refugee felt possibly about being fortunate enough to be a refugee?
Yes, I had some friends that didn't get out, and I felt very, very guilty about that. And the day of actually leaving Germany was such a terrible, terrible experience for us because people kept on coming all day long to visit and say goodbye. And the saying goodbye was absolutely terrible because you knew you'd never see these people again. You knew they'd be killed somehow. It was very, very difficult. And my mother fell apart in the end. I mean, and I remember the last person came up was a very nice lady, our dressmaker, who had helped us out in many ways. So, but I couldn't come in. I said, you can't see my mother. She's just, terrible shape. And she was very upset about it. So mother did come out then, But it was nice of me to say you can't, because I was protecting her because she had really fallen apart. But I had that for a very long time.
But when you can intellectualize that it wasn't your doing, that
Right.
the others were left behind, is that of any comfort, or is the guilt so overwhelming that?
No, I don't. I don't think it's overwhelming. No, I mean it's a fact. It's a matter of fact. This is what happened. What can you do? But I'm sure I suffered from it quite a long time. I lost some very good friends, and I was very concerned about them, and searched for them, and so on. Relatives too. I had family. My uncle perished, and my parents were with me. But we were a large family, and I was just thinking the other day. My children are complaining there are not many cousins. There are 4 or 5 cousins that are still alive. First, my father was, I think, one of the youngest of 9 children. everyone had offspring. Well, there's almost no one left. There is, the cousins met just 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. One cousin decided to go to Switzerland on vacation. A second one said, oh, if you go, the one living in England said, oh, it's not so far from us, I'm going to come too. The two cousins, one in Israel said, oh, I'm going to come, if you're going to be there, I'm going to come too. Another one said, well, from Israel, we are going to make a trip, but we'll see you too. So then somebody said, but why don't you go too? I had no intention of going. We had already had our vacation that year. My daughter had been very sick. But I said no. And then my daughter-in-law says to me, Mother, if everybody goes, why don't you go too? I said, it's a very good idea. I think I go. My daughter said, Mother, go. And I was at her house, in fact, when I made the final reservations. And I decided to go. And there were two cousins from Israel, one cousin from England, one cousin from France, one cousin who lives in Baltimore. She was the one that pulled it all together because she has a lot of charisma and everybody loves her. One cousin from Baltimore whose wife works for the University of Maryland and teaches American soldiers bookkeeping in Germany. They have an opportunity to start their business college, at the University of Maryland through courses taught at the Army base, and she travels through all the Army bases giving these courses. Well, they came, in fact, they were the ones that lived in the hometown, otherwise I wouldn't have gone. And so we were all there. We all met there, not all together, but over a period of a few weeks, all of us were there. Everybody met everyone.
Can you describe how you felt? I mean, that must have been...
It felt very good. I always liked these cousins. It felt like home, It felt, for once, I don't have much family here. My parents are deceased, and the only family on my side of the family there is the one cousin in Baltimore, and her brother, who happens to be in Germany right now, but who will come back, and a second cousin in California, two second cousins in California, the children of a cousin in California, and that's our family here. And I miss it terribly. I really do, and my children are complaining we don't have any family to visit. My daughter had a baby naming. Her husband's family, there were 40-odd people came for the baby naming. From our family, 5 came. My husband, myself, my son, and my son's 2 children. My son's wife was ill. Mm-hmm. So that's it. And Carol said, I hate it when, that we have so few family members. And really not many stick together. I mean, we happen to stick together fairly well. But on other sides of the family, they don't, stick together. You make close friends, but there's nothing like family.
Right, sure.
And you really would like your children to have family, too. And it's not there. You're missing something. But we all, I survived, and I didn't have concentration camp experience. My parents didn't, so I feel very lucky, really.
You mentioned earlier on, and we said we'd come back to it, the feeling of going back and seeing other people living where you used to live. And
oh, it was an awful feeling. I felt like throwing them out physically. And I know my hostility showed through. I finally left the building. I really wanted to go and look into one of the apartments and look out the windows. And one of them was an architectural office, one was something else, but my cousin was waiting downstairs too, and we had all kinds of other plans. So I finally left because I was afraid somebody would call the police, and because the building didn't belong to us anymore. Somebody had bought it for a very small amount of money and making a fortune. I think that's what made me so angry. Some German bought the house, didn't pay us much money for it, and is making a fortune on it. I mean, rent from 20 to 24 people. It's a lot of money. And I resented that very much. And then I decided to spend the rest of the day, that was only one day in the hometown actually, going toy shopping for the grandchildren. I love to buy toys since I'm, sort of experienced.
Do you have any feelings, just as from the standpoint of having maybe just kept up with politics and so forth, about the reunification of Germany, the potential for something like this happening again?
Yes, I feel very strongly about it. I'm very sad about the reunification. I don't like it. We don't need another strong Germany. We really don't need it. It's just what I said, just as I left the house, is the German word Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. You know, they're going to have another big, monstrous Germany. And there is no guarantee, no matter what anyone says, that they said, oh, everything's going to be fine as long as the wrong person, they don't follow the wrong person. Who is there to say that in 50 years the wrong person won't get in there, or in 30 years, or in 20 years, and they start all over again? We saw it on Charles Kuralt this morning. Somebody voiced the same opinion. Some survivor, they had a program on the people that met at the Elbe, the American and Russian people that unified Germany at the Elbe, that got together. I don't know if you remember that, unless it was on this morning. Mm-hmm. This big hugging that the American and Russian soldiers did when they got together, when they finally got together, had squashed the Germans. And one of them said to one of the people from that, they're having reunions every now and then. They just had a reunion. They said, I feel very badly about the reunification. I think something can happen there any time again once they were unified. And the reason they were divided is to keep them weak. So now they're going to be strong. And just as I left the house, I read the headline in the Tennessean today, how the United States, Russia, France, and England think it's good to reunite Germany. I don't think so. I really don't think so. They're going to have another superpower there, and they don't need it. The Germans are smart. They don't need another superpower there. They're smart, they're frugal, they can do with less if it's for their country. They can adjust very well if they want something. If they want something badly enough, they'll get it. There's no question about it.
Along these same lines, having lived through the times that you have lived through and seen so much in those years, we're faced now, we're documenting this for posterity, but we're faced even now with people saying it never happened.
What can I say? It did happen. What do you do to those people? Get them to read history books. Or some people just don't want to see that it happened. They're just denying it. And, you know, then you have to go from the psychiatric point of denial. And if they're going to deny, there's nothing you can do unless you can, through psychologists or psychiatrists, keep them from denying things. People will deny they have cancer if they don't want it, to the last minute. I denied when my parents were getting old and my father was really, and my mother really were getting, if anybody said anything that their mind wasn't quite right, I jumped down their throat. I knew it in my own mind, but I wouldn't admit it to anyone.
But do you feel that the people that say these things is there a danger that these people are being taken seriously, or do you just sort of dismiss it as these other forms of denial where you know?
Well, some people will take them seriously. There are a lot of ignorant people around, and some people will take them seriously. I don't think there's much you can do about it. I mean, you can deny it and deny it and deny it and show people the difference, but if someone, it's a free country. If someone wants to deny it, there's nothing you can do about it, I don't think.
In the documenting of your own experiences and the things that you've witnessed, what, in the time remaining, what is the most important thing, if you were to capsulize it, that you would really want people to get across to people? If they were to listen to nothing else that you had to say, what would be?
Look what I have suffered to get an education. Number one, it really wasn't any fun going to college. Believe me, it wasn't. I didn't have time to date, and I didn't have the money to have fun with or to go away on weekend trips or anything. It was just lucky that I went to university instead of to a college, where there wasn't that much student life, but I had no time at all for student life. I was working the afternoons and evenings, and during the day I went to classes, and I had very little free time, and even less free money to spend. So, you know, it was not a college experience per se, but I didn't go for a college experience. I just had to have an education. I'm sorry, what was your question?
Well, just trying to get an idea of what, we've talked about so many different things, and wanting to give the degree of emphasis to what you feel is most important. What do you want people to take away from this? What years from now you want people to look back on, and the times in which you lived, and what is important to know about this whole experience?
That it is possible to get an education no matter how difficult things are. I think that's really the most important thing of the story. And that one can end up being a reasonably normal person. I hope I'm reasonably normal.
Is there anything that we've left out that you feel? Is there anything that we've left out?
No, but you can be a normal person even though conditions were adverse. You can survive it. You can overcome it, and eventually come out okay. I think we don't laugh enough at home. I was trying to think what's wrong with our house. I go to other people's home. They laugh a lot more. We don't laugh enough. But aside from that, I think we're normal people living a normal life. My husband is from the same town that I'm in, except that we hadn't met until after the war, after the Holocaust, after I had been working, after I had established myself as occupational therapist about a year after that. A funny thing happened too. I got married later than most of my friends and some of my friends because I wanted to finish school and I wanted to have an education first. I wanted to be able to work and be independent even though I was married. And a lot of people said to me, why don't you forget about the education? I know I was going with one boy and his family said, Lori is so foolish. Look at all the money and time she's spending on education. She could be working in an office and make make a nice salary. But instead of that, she, going to NYU. I was very few of my friends and peers, German Jewish peers, went of that particular age group, went to NYU, to a university to finish their education. Most of them took short courses, stenography or whatever, sewing or whatever, and then went on to work. Fortunately, I didn't have to support my parents. They were able to support themselves. And I think that's why I was able to pursue a career on my own.
You did mention your husband, and maybe there's some more things to be learned about him.
Well, he's a very nice guy, and he came from the same hometown. His family was able to leave in 1938. He didn't have a lot of these experiences that I had. But we have enough experience to have had in common that we've been able to have a good life and a good marriage.
And you feel like you've been able to convey these experiences both to him and to your children? Or is there anything in the telling that you think is missing, that where you would have had to have been there really to appreciate?
I'm sorry, I can't quite relate to your question.
I'm sure that as you're explaining the various things that have happened, that sort of little mental images form that are really impossible to articulate.
Well, for many years I refused to talk about it, and my own children know very little about that. Of course I wouldn't talk about it. And just recently my daughter said, Mother, please record all your experience. We want to know. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what went on. And they have no idea really about this, and I've never talked about it for some reason or other. Occasionally I talk to friends about it. If someone really shows a big interest, I tell them, but I don't think the children ever were interested enough to sit still long enough to listen to all that. It's a lot, and for years I wouldn't talk. And also the children did not learn German at home. We did not speak German at all to our children, and a lot of people said, why don't you speak German? Why don't you let the children learn German as a main language, and then when they go to school they have a foreign language under their belt already. It makes it so much easier for their education. And I just couldn't speak German. I just couldn't.
It's too painful?
It was too painful. I just didn't want the memories. I also had fears. I remember being in the New York subways when those trains rolled by. I sometimes panicked, and I know that I almost went for psychiatric help, that if I were on the subway station on 79th Street where the Museum of Natural History is, and you see all these great big monkeys or dragons or whatever already in the subway station, pictures of it, and at the same time I have a train rolling by, I absolutely panicked. and had to rush out, and it was very, very frightening. It was just, and also I had nightmares, and if something like that would happen, I'd have nightmares for weeks. As far as the Holocaust programs, now that might be interesting. I attend very few of them, the Holocaust service and all that stuff, because I feel, what's the sense to it? I know what it was all about. I don't need to be remembered. And the rest of and I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but the rest of the people, don't make a big deal out of the Holocaust. When we needed you, you weren't there. When we wanted you to help us and help us get us out of Germany, nobody was there. People were not there. And now, don't feel so sad about the Holocaust. The time to have felt sad about the Holocaust was 20, 30, 40 years ago. You should have felt sad in 30 and 40 and 50 and tried to do something about it. Maybe they felt sad, yes, but they were afraid to do anything about it. They didn't want to ripple any waters there. Roosevelt was in, and the labor movement didn't want a lot of, and everybody was afraid of it. And when people came, they had to be assimilated quickly, reading some of the books. And
one thing we didn't touch on that I think is very important is we're reading now about how Roosevelt and all the people at that time in this country knew about what was going on, but
Right.
but either put a priority of winning the war above all this.
Hang on, this is our change of tape here.
Oh, okay.
What's up?